Lost causes are the only causes worth fighting for.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Cobbs Corner family, and welcome to another episode of Cobbs Corner, your one-stop shop for all things TV, film, and pop culture. If this is your first time listening, then welcome, and to my returning listeners, welcome back, and I hope everyone had an amazing summer. This is the 85th episode of Cobbs Corner, so thank you for listening and sharing. In this episode, I'm going to be going to the United States Senate on Capitol Hill with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Stay tuned. So before I go into the actual introduction for this episode, I think it's important to point out that this movie did come out in the year 1939. Now, true film buffs will know that 1939 was a big year in the history of American filmmaking. Two other films that are on our list for the AFI Top 100 came out in the year 1939. Gone with the Wind, which is number 6 on the list, and The Wizard of Oz, which is number 10 on the list. So stay tuned for those film reviews in the near future. Other movies like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Of Mice and Men, and of course, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington came out in 1939, just to name a few. So 1939, 85 years ago, that was a really, really big year for Hollywood. So I thought I'd just kind of give that context to today's episode. So, introduction. A naive youth leader is appointed to fill a vacancy in the U.S. Senate. His idealistic plans promptly collide with corruption at home and subterfuge from his hero in Washington, but he tries to forge ahead despite attacks on his character. Storyline. Naive and idealistic Jefferson Smith, leader of the Boy Rangers, is appointed on a lark by the spineless governor of his state. He is reunited with the state's senior senator, presidential hopeful and childhood hero Senator Joseph Payne. In Washington, however, Smith discovers many of the shortcomings of the political process as his earnest goal of a national boys' camp leads to a conflict with the state political boss, Jim Taylor. Taylor first tries to corrupt Smith and then later attempts to destroy Smith through a scandal. This introduction and storyline is provided to us, as always, via IMDb. Movies directed by Frank Capra. Frank Capra, he's directed a number of movies in the 1930s and 40s that were more idealistic and hopeful. I guess historians or people who know about American history and world history will know that the late 1930s, early 40s, that was a very challenging time for the world and a challenging time for America specifically. We were late 1930s. We were kind of headed towards war, kind of headed towards World War II, and then I'm sure we all know what happened in December 1941. Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor for the uninitiated, and then the Second World War. So this movie definitely came out at a contentious time in our nation's history. I mean, go back and listen to my reviews for Casablanca and Citizen Kane. Those movies actually came out in the 1940s. This movie came out the year before, 2 years prior to Pearl Harbor, but World War II was already underway, so a lot of Frank Capra's films have that like hopeful, idealistic tone to them. Outside of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Frank Capra, he's really known for directing It's a Wonderful Life, which came out in 1946. That's number 20 on the list, so keep an eye out for that episode in the near future. You Can't Take It With You, 1938, and It Happened One Night, 1934, which is number 46 on the AFI Top 100. So keep an eye out for that episode in the future. The movie is co-written by Sidney Buckman, Lewis R. Foster, and Miles Connolly. Sidney Buckman is known for his work on Cleopatra, 1963, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, 1941, The Talk of the Town, in 1942. Lewis R. Foster, known for his work on Tropic Zone, 1953, Captain China, 1950, and Crash Out, 1955. Lastly, Miles Connolly is known for his work on Here Comes the Groom, 1951, The Right to Romance, 1933, Music for Millions in 1944, and It Happened in Hollywood, 1937. Movie stars Jimmy Stewart, as the aforementioned Jefferson Smith, as the titular Mr. Smith, as I should say. James Stewart, he's known for playing Scotty Ferguson in Vertigo, 1958. Vertigo's number 9 on the AFI Top 100. So keep an eye out for that one, for that episode in the future. He played George Bailey in the aforementioned It's a Wonderful Life. He played Paul Beagler in Anatomy of a Murder, 1959. And he played Mike Connor in The Philadelphia Story, 1940, which is number 44 on the AFI Top 100, so look out for that episode in the future. Jean Authors played Miss Saunders. She's known for playing Alice Sycamore in You Can't Take It With You, 1938. Marion Starrett in Shane, 1953, which is number 45 on the AFI Top 100. Connie Milligan in The More the Merrier, 1943. Claude Rains, veteran actor Claude Rains, he plays Senior Senator Joseph Payne. He's known for playing Captain Louis Renault in Casablanca, 1942, which was number 3. Longtime listeners of Cobbs Corner will remember we reviewed Casablanca on episode 64. That was number 3 on the AFI Top 100. So go back and listen to that episode. I think I did it like maybe last fall, might have been fall 2023. So go back and listen to episode 64 if you have not already done so, or listen to that episode after you finish listening to this one. He played Alexander Sebastian in Notorious, 1946, and he played Dr. Jack, aka the Invisible Man, in 1933's The Invisible Man. Without any further ado, let's go to Cobb's Corner. So like most movies of that time period, the movie opens with opening credits. And I think I've talked about in the past how, I think in like the first episode of the AFI series when I did Citizen Kane, I pointed out how Citizen Kane was controversial for its time period because it didn't have any opening credits. And, 1939, it was the norm to have all the credits at the start of the movie and at the end of the movie. Go listen to my Star Wars review, go listen to my Citizen Kane review. So opening credits, and after the opening credits we get it starts, movie kind of starts off with some sad news. The junior senator from whatever the state was that Jefferson Smith is from, his state senator has died, and now the governor of the state needs to find a replacement. So initially, they have this other politician who's kind of a bit of a yes man who can kind of just kind of go along with things and kind of go along with like the political machine in Washington. He's the initial choice, but he's not the popular choice. You know, most of the people in that state, they want Jefferson Smith. Jefferson Smith, who is kind of like an everyman. He's kind of like an average Joe. You know, he's the kind of character who we can all kind of see a bit of ourselves. I feel like in in Jefferson Smith, and I think he was very he was also very inexperienced. He's very inexperienced. He's never held office, and he's just very idealistic, very positive. He's a leader of the local Boy Rangers club. Boy Rangers, which is probably like a which is I guess this universe's equivalent to the Boy Scouts of America. Big shout out to Troop 5 in Middlebury, Connecticut. What's up? Um, Shout out to all the Eagle Scout, all my fellow Eagle Scouts that are listening. Fellow Order of the Arrow members that are listening. I promise this is a movie review. This is not just this. This is not simply a self promotion shout out episode. I promise, guys. I know I haven't done this in a while. Bear with me. Uh, so, Boy Rangers leader, he gets picked to go to Washington. They have a whole banquet for him, and he connects with the aforementioned Senator Joseph Payne. Now, Joseph Payne, played by Claude Rains, Joseph Payne was best friends with Jefferson Smith's father. So Smith and Payne are actually very close. He almost sees he has a strong like admiration and respect for Senator Payne. He almost sees him as a surrogate father in that way. So Payne sort of takes Jefferson Smith under his wing. The two of them, they go down to Washington to get a lot of a lot of really funny scenes of them at the airport. And I mean, I get that it was 1939, but like the only black people that I see in this movie are like the servants and the like the people in like the background, the servants, the bodyguards, like that kind of. I definitely noticed that. I mean, it was 1939 to be fair, but you know, just thought I'd point that out. And you know, he travels down to Washington D.C. and he is just he's really caught up in like the romance of Washington D.C. Shout out to all my listeners in Washington D.C. in the DMV area, or should I say, shout out to all my listeners in the next state. Okay, I'm saying that live here on air. I know I've said that, you know, on Cobbs Corner we typically don't get into politics, but I mean, you know, Washington D.C. Who knows? Might be the 51st state one day. Might already be a state, depending on when you're listening to this episode. But big shout out to my listeners in D.C. Mr. Smith, yeah, I'm just gonna call him Mr. Smith for the rest of this episode because Jefferson Smith is a little too long. Mr. Smith is caught up in the romance of Washington D.C. It's a really beautiful, beautiful area. I highly recommend you all go there. He's just looking at like the Washington Monument, the Capitol Building, the Jefferson Memorial. We get a scene of him at the Lincoln Memorial, and he's reading like the Gettysburg Address, which I had to read when I was in Boy Scouts. I had to read the Gettysburg Address. You know, fourscore, and honestly, I couldn't recite it today, but there's that last line of like, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So this again highlights the sort of all American, like, you know, red blooded American, you know, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness sort of idealism in Mr. Smith. You know, and also a bit of naivete, and linguistics. Feel free to critique my pronunciations in the comments down below. Um, you see how he's like a bit naive to like how things really work in Washington, and but he has this like, all American life, liberty, pursuit of happiness sort of idealism and excitement in a way. Excitement and in innocence. That's the word that I'm going to use. Like innocence about him and this excitement. I'm ready to go to the Senate and let's get things done. He meets a secretary by the name of Miss Saunders, played by Jean Arthur, and she's and throughout the movie she's kind of this like maybe cynical sort of secretary, who's been working in Washington D.C. for quite some time, and she knows how things are run between the the Senate and the press, and I guess her boyfriend, who would eventually become her husband by the end of the movie. He works in the press. So I think this movie was very almost, I guess you have to consider the time period, 1939. It was very informative as to what the Senate chamber looks like and how the vice president presides over the Senate. And you know, it was very informative in that regard, in showing the American people like pretty much how things are run in Washington D.C. So it's very informative and educational in that regard. Um, Miss Saunders, she just has this very, I guess, realistic and defeatist mentality about Washington D.C. and she kind of tries to uh, forewarn, Mr. Smith about the way that things are really run in Congress. And there's a bill, that's introduced in Congress, and it's like something to do with the budget. And the one critique that Mr. Smith has is he wants for this bill, he wants a Boy Rangers reservation to be built in his home state with government funding. Like that's the one suggestion that he has, and he even like tells this to the press one night. And I mean, the press can be pretty ruthless. I mean, you'll say one thing and they will publish something completely entirely or take it out of context. So, I mean, we see it happen all the time today. But I mean, this even 85 years ago, it was a thing when there was no internet, when there was no TMZ, when there was no YouTube, and all they had was the newspapers. The newspaper, they had a tendency to take things out of context here and there, and they had him doing bird calls and stuff. But yeah, his suggestions like we should have a Boy Rangers reservation built in my home state with government money that will be paid back by that the Boy Rangers will then pay back. They will donate, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters. So the government will make that money back. But he is pushing for this reservation to be built, saying, we need to get these boys off the streets, regardless of their age, their race, where they come from. Get them off the streets, get them in nature, get them out of the big cities. Let's get them in nature, get some sunlight. Let's raise up leaders. Like there's one point where he says how, if things are kind of crazy, if these are the men that are running America now, then we have a responsibility to break the cycle with the next generation. Like we need to have this Boy Rangers reservation built in my state. And of course, the political machine, which Joseph Payne is actually a part of. You see, now Joseph Payne, he is a part of this political machine. He's kind of more of a puppet. He's working for Jim Taylor, who's this political boss back in the home state. and they don't essentially they don't want to have this dam. They well, not dam. They don't want this reservation to be built because they want to build a dam through this. They want to build a dam through the town and through where the reservation is set to be built. And so they do something that's actually like really, really messed up, and I feel like this happens like in the real world today with politicians. And I mean, again, this is why I'm really trying to keep it focused on the movie and not so much on the real world and real world like politics. I'm staying out of there. They pretty much blame. They end up like framing Jefferson Smith for framing Mr. Smith for like corruption and for like him like in inheriting that land and then pushing for the dam to be built. Like they really like set him up, and it's just really really disgusting the things that they end up doing to him. And of course, Mr. Smith, the idealist, he is still pushing for this bill, but then in protest, a bunch of the senators walk out, like pretty much all the senators walk out of the Senate chamber in protest, and then he starts to filibuster. Now, filibustering is essentially when you stall. Filibuster, okay, dictionary definition, an action such as a prolonged speech that obstructs progress in a legislative assembly while not technically contravening the required procedures. So yeah, he's filibustering. He's essentially stalling. He just keeps speaking, keeps quoting the Constitution and quoting Lincoln. He is like filibustering, this stopping this bill that would build the dam through the town instead of the reservation. He starts to like filibuster, and it's for like 12 hours. Like I think at one point he even like pulls out like a thermos and like a water bottle. Oh man, like this guy came prepared. He really came prepared. So in the third act we get a filibuster, and he even like faints at the end. He's still alive, but he faints, and Joseph Payne actually pulls out a gun, and he walks out of the Senate chamber, pulls out a gun, and attempts to take his own life because he knows that what he's doing is wrong. He knows he's wrong. He knows that what he's doing is wrong. And Jim Taylor, who's like the political boss back in the home state, he has controlled the press. He's controlled the story about Mr. Smith and has essentially labeled him as a bad guy in the press. He's turned his own state against him. So Mr. Smith has had to call upon his mom, I think, his mom, who I guess was looking over the Boy Rangers, to publish the right story. And we get a scene where the Boy Rangers are going around publishing the true story about Mr. Smith and how he's a hero. He's fighting for the people in Washington. But of course, Jim Taylor, he is like stopping those stories from being spread. We get like scenes where like a lot of his foot soldiers are kind of going around and stopping these Boy Rangers from like spreading the truth. So I guess that's a lot of that stuff does still happen today. I think this movie is a bit ahead of its time in that regard, in terms, or maybe not ahead of its time, but a bit timeless in the way that it talks about American politics, and the way that it talks about like the press and corruption. Like these are very like relevant themes, and I'll get to them in the next segment. But in 2024, 85 years, almost 90 years later, like this stuff is still happening. So anyway, I mean, Senator Payne attempts to take his life, fails. He's still alive at the end of the movie. Mr. Smith is still alive. The bill does not get passed, and so there is that poetic justice in the end. Thank God. Um, in the title where they say Mr. Smith goes to Washington, he really, truly went to Washington, and the whole entire and the whole entire Senate knew it. Every politician knew that Mr. Smith went to Washington. Every American, in fact, they all knew that Mr. Smith was in Washington. He didn't just visit Washington. He went to Washington.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding.
So Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is, in my opinion, it's a classic. It's a classic. It's one of the best. I know I haven't reviewed a whole lot of like government movies, like government and politics movies on this podcast. I might review I might review more of those kinds of movies in the future. Maybe like I know All the President's Men. I think All the President's Men is on the AFI Top 100. So All the President's Men. I might do JFK. I might do Wag the Dog in future episodes. But the thing I like about this movie is they don't specify which political party. Like they don't specify which political party people are, these senators are a part of. They're just senators. Everyone's just a senator. Everyone's an American. That's the thing I like about this movie, is that it's very objective, and it doesn't point fingers on one side or the other. It's there's no Democrats, there's no Republicans, there's no independents. There's just senators. There's just Americans. That's the thing I like about this movie. It's very and I think that's what makes it so timeless, is that it doesn't get specific in terms of like political parties and political agendas. So Frank Capra, well, not Frank Capra, Mr. Smith, he represents all of us. I feel like there's a Mr. Smith in all of us, the idealist, that like radical. I don't want to say positivity, but like the radical like idealism that everything is going to work out, that everything's going to be okay, that unshakable faith and hope that at times is something you have to give yourself. Let's not forget the wise words of Princess Leia. Hope is like the sun. If you can only see it when it's in the sky, you will never make it through the night. But Mr. Smith having that unshakable faith, that unshakable hope, that unshakable like discipline and idealism in the face of corruption, in the face of adversity. Him saying, no, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Our ancestors fought and died for this country. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard. This is not what our founding fathers wanted. All this corruption, all this back and forth, all this, politics, essentially. I might have been a little bit facetious with that last line, but this is not what America's all about. So Jefferson Smith, he is the realest character. I want to keep it clean. He is like the realest character in this movie. He's the only one really fighting for what's right, and really fighting for our American ideals. And I feel as if there is a Mr. Smith inside each and every one of us, myself included. and you listening at home to this podcast. There's a Mr. Smith inside of you. There's an idealist inside of you. There's a hero inside of each and every one of us. All of us are Mr. Smith. And by watching this movie, we get to sort of live vicariously and see Washington D.C. and see the Senate through the innocent eyes. Well, I almost want to say virgin eyes of of Mr. Smith, and kind of show up and be able to say, this is a beautiful city. I'm gonna show up to the Senate, and I'm going to go and knock them dead. I'm gonna go and be great. We're gonna change the world. Sometimes it takes that crazy, unshakable idealism to actually create change. And that's why I'm actually looking forward to It's a Wonderful Life, which I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to be able to release that episode. I know it's a Christmas movie. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it around Christmas time. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, just that idealistic, unshakable faith that, we are gonna, that, dare I say, like, Kendrick Lamar, we gonna be all right, kind of positivity, kind of idealism in the midst of adversity, being able to say, we gonna be all right, it's gonna work out, we have to keep moving, we got work to do. I think Mr. Smith, he's kind of a bit the antithesis of Miss Saunders. Miss Saunders, she's very cynical, very negative, because she's just seen too much bad in the world, and it's easy to fall into a state of negativity, a state of cynicism. It's easy when when things are going bad, when your side is losing. It's easy to give up, and it's an excuse not to get back up again and to keep moving. The future is there for us, guys. And yes, I am, quoting a speech from President Obama, but he was right when he said, the future is there for us to seize, and we just have to seize it. Got to work together. We got to have unshakable faith, unshakable idealism. We got to be positive. We got to work together, because we're all in this together. You get one world, one planet Earth. You're all family. You're all in this together, and I think that is one of the, and I think that's the essential message of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, is that we are all Mr. Smith. We all have the potential. We all have the ability to achieve greatness. Seize the day. Seize the day. And as always, I'm going to wrap up the episode with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington Plus. On the awards side, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington won 1 Oscar. The movie had a total of 5 award wins with 12 nominations total. At the 1940 Academy Awards, It was nominated for Best Picture. James Stewart was nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role. Harry Carey was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. Claude Rains was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. I mean, I feel like I might be pissing off some like real film scholars if I say that he might have gotten robbed of that Oscar. Because Claude Rains, I mean, he was phenomenal as Joseph Dane. Frank Capra was nominated for Best Director. Lewis R. Foster won the Oscar for Best Writing Original Story, so that's the one Oscar win that the movie got. Sidney Buckman was nominated for Best Writing Screenplay. Lionel Banks was nominated for Best Art Direction. John P. Lividary was nominated for Best Sound Recording. And not lastly. Gene Havlick and Al Clark were nominated for Best Film Editing. And last but not least, Dmitry Tiomkin was nominated for Best Music Scoring. On to the trivia. The scenes where James Stewart wanders around in amazement at the Washington monuments were quote-unquote stolen since the U.S. Park Service had denied the studio permission to film near there. Wow. So they were filmed like guerrilla style. I mean, and you figure that was probably expensive back then. I've heard that film was not inexpensive, like back in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, we're talking, this is like pre-color, Technicolor. This is pre-Technicolor, pre-Panvision. I mean, film was expensive, even in black and white, and it was more expensive to film in color. So yeah. I mean, that's kind of like, I think the like car chase scene in Tokyo Drift. I think it's the car chase scene in Tokyo Drift where Han dies. I want to say that's the scene in Tokyo Drift that was filmed illegally in Tokyo, because most of Tokyo Drift was filmed in downtown Los Angeles. Like 12 blocks, they had to redecorate it to make it look like the Shibuya district in Japan. Shout out to my listeners in LA. Shout out to my listeners in Tokyo. That scene where Han dies was filmed illegally, guerrilla style, in Tokyo, and the studio set up a fall guy who spent the night in jail. So yeah, a lot of these movies, they said we was hustling. So, but yes, get film permits. Cobbs Corner. I am not advocating for illegal downloading of movies, for illegal filming or anything. No. Go through the necessary channels. Bitterly denounced by Washington insiders, angry at its allegations of corruption, yet banned by fascist states in Europe who were afraid it showed that democracy works. Yeah, it's like I said in the intro, like this movie came out at a very tumultuous time in the world. Like, so we had, let's see, 1939. I want to say FDR was still president. He was, I'm trying to think, 1928, 1932. 36. He was like towards the end of his second term in office. The Nazis had already like invaded Poland. World War II was World War. I think 1939. That was officially the year that World War II started. I think, because I know Marco Polo Bridge incident was in 1937 when Japan invaded China, but then Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, and then the world was officially at war. So yeah, this was a very tumultuous times. Like fascist states in Europe, banned by fascist states in Europe because they didn't want people to know that, oh yeah, democracy actually works. Yep, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What up? Also, America, we were like neutral at that time too. So In 1942, when a ban on American films was imposed in German-occupied France, shout out to my listeners in Deutschland and France. France, he just hosted the Summer Olympics. It was amazing. It's probably one of my favorite Olympic games that has happened, all right, ever. Big shout out to France. And shout out to my listeners in Germany. Guten Tag. Bonjour and Guten Tag, I should say. 1942, when a ban on American films was imposed in German-occupied France, the title theaters chose Mr. Smith Goes to Washington for their last movie before the ban went into effect. Smart. Smart again, fascist states in Europe, they don't want the people to know that democracy can work. And, here at Cobbs Corner, we are united against fascism, against dictatorships. Yeah. One Paris theater reportedly screened the film nonstop for 30 days prior to the ban. All right. Yeah. German-occupied France. Yep. They said our last movie is going to be Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. American democracy. Vive liberté. For 30 days. And Hitler was like, nah. Hitler was like, nine. Oh, no. Practicing my German. According to the New York Times, the Boy Scouts of America objected to having any part in Mr. Capra's reform movement. And Frank Capra therefore had to use the fictitious name of the Boy Rangers. Makes sense. Makes sense. A lot of times, like especially I was watching. Well, my family, they've been watching the show All American, and I know there's a couple of the universities in All American, like they're based on real life universities like Yale, Harvard, Columbia, wherever. But they can't legally. But like those universities, they didn't give the CW, they didn't give the studios authorization to use their name and their likeness, so they have to use like a surrogate, like replacement. So that's not uncommon, Yeah, Boy Rangers, that's the equivalent of Boy Scouts of America. It's not the first time, and also not the last time that something like that has happened. Last bit of trivia, because I know y'all are tired of listening to me ramble. I'm sure. I am working on my run times. Though it may not look like it, but I am working on the run times, I promise. The story on which the movie was based is titled The Gentleman from Montana, but the state is not specified in the movie. Oh, okay. I realized that the state is not specified. Okay, so they don't specify the state. They don't specify the political party. I don't even think they specify anybody's age. And I know for House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25. And for Senate, you got to be 30. And for President, you got to be 35. So we know that Mr. Smith is at least 30 years old because he was in the Senate. So yeah. But yeah, state's not specified. A user review. A 40-foot dive into a tub of water. 9 out of 10 stars. Accomplished, honest, and heartfelt. This will re-inspire you to believe in the goodness of people, even though the messages conveyed by those in power these days suggest anything but. James Stewart plays the innocence and naivety required for the role to perfection, while you can genuinely believe that Gene Arthur has actually fallen for him for real. The great Claude Rains fills the boots of the corrupt senator with aplomb, while Edward Arnold reminds us of a few of his type that are still around today. Probably the best film you'll ever see with the most mundane of titles. I wholeheartedly agree. Anonymous user who left us this user review on IMDb, you know who you are. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, even the first line, re-inspires you to believe in the goodness of people, even though the messages conveyed by those in power these days suggest anything but. I mean, that is, spot on. Like, believe in the goodness of people. Like with Cobbs Corner, I do my best with these movies to actually like impact you all and like to get you guys to like think critically and to have faith, but believe in the goodness of people. I know that this is kind of contrary to my Chinatown review, where there is no poetic justice, where the villains win in the end. And, again, it's easy to just kind of, say, people are the worst and, this and that, and, we're all just screwed either way. But, I believe in the goodness of people, and I hope that this movie has inspired you all to believe in the goodness of people, despite what the power structure may tell you. In the midst of all the chaos, just know that there is good in the world. And I wish for you all to be the good in the world. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Mahatma Gandhi. The movie has an IMDb rating of 8.1 out of 10 stars and a Letterboxd score of 4.1 out of 5, so about the same. The movie was released on October 19th, 1939, here in the United States. The movie's in English. It is also known as Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. One of the filming locations was the Lincoln Memorial, National Mall, Washington, District of Columbia. Production company, Columbia Pictures. Shout out to Columbia Pictures. Box office. The movie had an estimated budget of $1.9 million. That's which I feel like was a lot of money back then. That's about $42.2 million today. Its gross domestic box office haul was $144,738, about $3.2 million today. So it did not make a profit at the box office. Its opening weekend in the U.S. and Canada, it made $83,205, about $1.8 million today. Its gross worldwide was the same as its domestic. So this movie was not a box office success. But years later, we consider it a classic. Rotten Tomatoes. Tomato meter score, 97%. Audience score, 94%. Critics' consensus. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and returns with an uplifting ode to idealism that distills the strengths of its director and leading man. I'm with the critics on this one. 97% for sure. Scratch that. I'm with the audience. 94%. Where can you watch Mr. Smith? As of the recording of this podcast, you can watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with a subscription on Prime Video. It is also available for rent on Fandango at Home, Apple TV, and purchase on Fandango at Home, as well as Apple TV and YouTube. I had purchased it on YouTube. That is all for today's review of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. If you liked what you heard today, then do not forget to give this podcast a 5-star review on all listening platforms. If you're watching this on YouTube, then like this video, share it, subscribe, click that bell to turn on the post notifications so you get notified when I upload new episodes. If you want to stay up to date on all things Cobbs Corner, then you need to follow me on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. All that information is in the show notes below. Feel free to email me with any movie suggestions, comments, etc. at cobbscornerpodcast@gmail.com. That is also linked in the show notes below. If you made it to the end of this episode, I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Click the video on the screen right now to listen to my last episode where I reviewed E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And as always, I will talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys. it sound right, boys.